this coming budget faces two kinds of problems. One are internal problems within the economy, and one are problems that are coming from outside the economy, from the global situation. So these two concerns are, affecting the economy. The government says that the rate of growth has declined from 8% to 5.4% over the last 1 year. But this is the rate of growth of the organized sector only. It doesn't capture the unorganized sector's decline. If you take into account the decline in the unorganized sector, then actually the rate of growth is not 5.4%, but it'll be closer to 1 or 2%, and so on. So in other words, the problem before the economy is that the unorganized sector is declining, and that's why the unemployment is high. If the unorganized sector was rising at 5.4% or 6%, as the earlier claim was, then the employment generation would be quite robust. Because of the split between the organized and the unorganized sector, because 94% are in the unorganized sector, and their incomes are not rising because of inflation, because of unemployment. Therefore, the demand slowdown is taking place in the economy, which is then affecting the rate of growth of the organized sector. So the 5.4% refers to the rate of growth of the organized sector. So organized sector's rate of growth is declining. So within the economy, basically what we need to do is we need to boost the unorganized sector, but government's focus has been on the organized sector. It is trying to boost the organized sector by various things like the PLI scheme and capital investments in the budget, which are going mostly to the organized sector and so on. So that's why the economy is facing this problem. And this problem was there even before the pandemic, when for 8 quarters, the rate of growth had declined from 8% down to 3.1% in the quarter just before the pandemic. And then we know that during the pandemic, the rate of growth had slumped very sharply. So in other words, this inequality that has been growing and the crisis that the people working in the unorganized sector face because of the decline in their incomes, these two need to be addressed very importantly. Now, if that is the internal problem, that problem will get aggravated by the external problem coming from the fact that you have the Ukraine war continuing, you have the Palestine situation where a genocide is taking place, which is disturbing the entire situation in the West Asia from where much of our oil comes. So there's a problem that supply constraints coming from outside could aggravate at some point, and especially with Mr. Trump coming and Mr. Trump's characterizing India as the tariff king. And therefore, there's a danger that he might levy tariffs on our export to the USA. And we have a good, healthy surplus with the USA that could come down because of the pressure that Mr. Trump would exercise on India. He had already done that in the first phase when he was the president before Mr. Biden's term. That time he had removed the GSP from Indian goods. He had levied tariffs, and he did not allow tariffs to be levied by India. But this tariff war that he's talking about, where he's saying we'll impose tariffs on China, on Mexico, on Canada, on India, this could lead to a tariff war, which could actually mean that the world economy would slow down and would face inflation and would also face supply bottlenecks. So all these together could disturb our exports and imports, and that would further slow down the economy, because the economy has been depending on investment and on export-import. But investment by the private sector has been down because if the demand is less, capacity utilization is less, and then the investment becomes less. So all these things put together, the external environment would aggravate the problem that the internal economy faces as a result of the fact that we are not taking care of the unorganized sector. And the unorganized sector consisting of agriculture, of the micro sector, of the small sector of the economy, these have been facing headwinds. That's why farmers are protesting, the workers are protesting, youth is protesting, the women are facing problems of unemployment and underemployment. So all these things put together, the budget becomes very important. As far as one can tell, the employment situation remains grave, where educated youth are not finding employment. Women are underemployed or working free, so they don't get counted in the definition of employment as far as the ILO definition is concerned. The Indian definition counts even these people, and that's why there's a difference in the employment figure between what the ILO definition, which CMI uses, and the government's own definition. So the problem really is that we showed in our report in 2022 that 320 million Indians have some kind of proper work, but 280 million Indians don't have proper work, either because they've stopped looking for work and they're doing some free work, or they are underemployed, or they are unemployed, or they are disguised unemployed. So there are four kinds of unemployment that the people face, whether it be the youth or whether it be the women. Now, it means that 320 million Indians who have some kind of proper work, they have to support 1.4 billion. So each working person has to support 4.4 people. Whereas if these 280 million also had proper work, then 600 million would have to support 1.4 billion. And therefore, each one person working would support 2.2. So therefore, family welfare would improve because more work would be available, more incomes would be available, plus the GDP would grow faster. Now, one of the reasons why the GDP slows down is that because of inequality, because the unorganized sector, the 94% working in the unorganized sector, when they have inadequate incomes, then their demand in the economy goes down. And that demand affects the organized sector as well, not just the unorganized sector. So in other words, the unemployment situation is very acute. The government tried to come out with these schemes, but these schemes were targeted at the organized sector. They were not going to be able to give jobs in the unorganized sector. And when unemployment takes place, the conflict over jobs becomes very acute. Everybody wants reservation. So even the well-off communities like the Marathas in Maharashtra, they've been demanding reservations for themselves. Similarly, Jats in the North India, they've been demanding reservation for themselves and so on. So the conflict in society becomes acute when there's poverty and there's unemployment. So the unemployment is because of the unorganized sector. The more you fund the organized sector, the less will be the employment generation because demand would shift from the unorganized to the organized sector. So unorganized sector will come down further. So I have been arguing that since the time of demonetization, when the unorganized sector started declining, instead of rising at 6% or 5%, they've actually been declining. And evidence for that is coming from the textile sector, from the leather goods sector, from the trade sector, and so on. That the decline in the unorganized sector is because the organized sector is growing faster, given the digitization moves, given the concessions that the government is giving to the organized sector, like cutting corporate tax rate in 2019 and things like that. So in other words, the government is doing the opposite of what it needs to do to be able to generate more employment. And the scheme that they came up with actually does not really provide unorganized sector jobs, which is where actually the jobs need to be created. So for the unorganized sector, what are the steps that need to be taken? That is something that the government needs to focus on. What is required to be done in terms of correctives is to boost agriculture, where 46% of the workforce is working. So that's the largest component. And that's where the incomes are wanting. There also, there's a lot of mechanization that's taking place. And that's why there's a lot of surplus labor which needs to move out to the non-agriculture sector. So the non-agriculture sector also needs to be boosted, apart from the agriculture sector to be boosted. Agriculture incomes have to be boosted, and that requires minimum support price, which is what the farmers are demanding. Now, that need not come in the budget. That can come outside the budget also, where the government does. But what can come within the budget is greater expenditure on agriculture and on rural development, and more of a scientific development in agriculture, more of the services for transferring what is in the research to the field. So extension services. So those can come in the budget. Then regarding the micro sector, there are 6 crore micro units and they employ 97.5% of the MSME employment. They have been set back because all the policies for MSME go to the medium sector rather than the small and the micro sector. So micro sector needs to be separated from the MSME and specific policies designed for the micro sector. Second thing that needs to be done is that we need to actually support the small and the medium sector by reforming the GST. Now, when GST is applied at the moment, the input credit problem comes for the small sector and the micro sector, and therefore they become uncompetitive. So GST has to be reformed, and it is a last point tax, but the tax is collected at every stage. It should be collected only at the last stage rather than at every stage. That is, simplify it and make it better for the micro and the small units. Then, to generate employment, we need to increase our expenditure on education and health and other such social services because they are employment intensive. Unfortunately, what we see in the budget is that they are actually being curtailing these expenditures on education and health. We are far from our target of 6% on public education and 3% on public health. Those need to be moved. And for that, what we need to do is we need to move expenditures of budget, both at the center and the states, towards these social sectors. Finally, the capital expenditures that are targeted in the central budget of 11.11 lakh crores last time, they were targeted at capital intensive, road construction and freight corridor, etc. Earlier, these used to be labor intensive, but now these are also highly capital intensive with big machines being used to construct roads and railway lines, etc. So this focus has to shift towards labor intensive rather than the capital intensive sector. So the budget can do a lot to generate more employment, provided the government gives up its idea that we have to formalize the economy. The average employment, say, on a small farm is just 1 or 2 people. The average employment in the micro sector is 1.7. So you can't formalize these. You can only kill them. So government's policies are killing these small farms, is killing the unorganized micro sector units rather than actually converting them into a formal sector. And anyway, given the technology, the formal sector, the organized sector is not going to generate much employment because even in agriculture, with a lot of harvester combines and tractors and threshers and potato digging machines, now employment generation is very weak even in agriculture. In micro sector also, if you don't boost it, then your unemployment will rise. And if you put money into the organized sector or encourage it at the expense of the unorganized sector, then also what you'll find is that the unemployment will rise.